One of the things that people don't realize, I mean, this isn't so much investment advice, but it's just general financial advice is, if they've kind of taken a sideline to their finances and what's been going on in the relationship from a financial standpoint, they end up losing a spouse either by way of divorce or they pass away or they get critically injured. Like, I can't tell you how many women are shocked just trying to get credit, right? And they say, yeah, but my net worth is this. What do you mean I can't get a credit card?
Hello and welcome to the Divorce Circle. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have with us Seth Allen, who is the founder and portfolio manager for Cadence Financial Group, part of Raymond James. Thanks for joining us today, Seth.
Thanks, Sabina. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So we're here to talk about divorce and wealth strategy. How does divorce affect somebody's investment portfolio and long-term financial strategy?
Yeah, I think it's a big open-ended question because it really depends on what type of divorce you're dealing with. If it's you're in a battle with your spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse versus a collaborative divorce, those two things can differ quite a bit in terms of what that outlook looks for your long-term investment strategy. I think that the important thing is to kind of try to step outside the situation for a moment and just realize your life is going to change, like any other big life event, such as losing a spouse. Or something that happens on the medical side that causes you to change what you're doing when it comes to saving and your investments. And so I think by taking a step outside the situation, which is hard sometimes because there's a lot of emotions involved, it gives you some time to reflect and maybe you have a professional that can help you work through that to see, like, what does this actually look like?
What are the most common mistakes you see people make with their investments, not just after divorce, but even during the divorce when they've just separated? What are some big mistakes people will make?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is divorces don't happen in a day or a week. It's something that builds over time. And I think that when going through the divorce and the actual divorce and the day that it's done, there tends to be a reaction where human beings, where we want to quickly kind of resolve all the other things going on in our life, including what we're doing investment-wise, because we've taken so long to make this decision in some cases to leave that partner or vice versa. And so, I think the best or the thing that I see that people that do it right is take time to reflect, right? This is a big life change, and you really need to have the time to figure out how this affects if you have children, maybe you have parents that you need to look after. Maybe there's another, but maybe not a spouse at this point, but somebody significant coming into your life. And I think you need to kind of, again, take yourself out of the situation and just reflect on the amount of risk you really need to take to get the financial outcome you want. And some people say, well, yeah, but my risk tolerance hasn't changed, or, I'm the same person as before, but now I have freedom. That's all great, but what can get in the middle of those things is emotions and biases. And I have seen people go both ways, right? I've seen people want to put the money under the mattress, metaphorically, to people that want to go and buy the most high-flying tech stocks on the NASDAQ because they feel they have to make up for lost time. And I think the problem with all that is, we wouldn't jump in a car and put a bag over our head and go driving 100 miles an hour down the road. We would say, you're going to end in an accident. Why would you do that with your financial portfolio? And so that's why you got to take the time, I think, to kind of think this out a little bit and see, maybe your risk tolerance hasn't changed, but maybe your capacity to take risk has.
Yes.
Right. And that's a big differentiation. Market doesn't care about your capacity. Market's about risk. Capacity is a different type of risk.
So do you not see, like, when people are going through a divorce, before they were divorced, they were part of a family unit, whether they're a couple or they have children, and they have certain financial goals that they're trying to achieve with their investment portfolio, say. Those values are going to change after divorce. So is it not about needing to rewrite your financial plan, so to speak, after it's over? And how can you do that while you're in the middle of a separation and you don't know? So do you tell people to just hang tight, just don't change anything other than what you have until the dust has settled and the numbers are done, and then we will revisit what your goals are?
Yeah, I think, again, it's a both of us been through divorces ourselves.
Yes, we have.
And we know plenty of people that have, and you see the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really comes down to what kind of divorce you're dealing with is your starting point. I think that, what you really need to be, I don't think people's values change that much. They might be hidden or buried because they're dealing with an abusive spouse, but those values are kind of with us from childhood. I think, again, what changes is the outcomes that we need to achieve, right? And that's where I think a big mistake people have is they spend too much time trying to set the goals and objectives and what are my values, when if they have time to reflect and think, they're already within them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the outcomes that you need to focus on. And I think depending on your situation and, we call it, it's a generic term, I call it stakeholders, but, when you got to take into account children, family members, things like that, they may have to be supporting. I think that you need to kind of, focus on how does that outcome change, right? Were you the primary breadwinner or was your spouse or were both of you, right? That's a big question. And so I think from there, what again, this is that reflection I talk about, taking some time to think. And yeah, in the short term, it may seem stressful to kind of take a break on your portfolio or not do anything. But longer term, you're going to reap the benefits because you're going to make better decisions more calmly and succinct to what is focused on the outcomes you're trying to get.
I would have to say that was the best advice I received during my divorce, was just to not do anything and let everything just be where it was. I stopped putting into my portfolio even because I had no idea what the financial outcome was going to be. And then once that was over, then started to make steps as to what that looks like. Now you're divorced and you got half of what you had before in terms of your investments. Should I be aggressive now in my investment strategy, or should I be conservative in my investment strategy? Because now I'm say for myself, I was 45 when my divorce was actually, I think it was 47 by the time my divorce actually got finalized. So obviously retirement's a lot closer than it was when I started investing in my 20s. So should I be more aggressive with my portfolio now? Because now I've got half what I did.
I like to think of it not as a binary decision. Again, I go back to what's the outcome you need to achieve, because if you know the outcome you need to achieve, then you know how aggressive you need to be with the risk to take. Like yourself, I was in my 40s. I was 41 when the divorce was official. And had to kind of rebuild what I was kind of gearing up to be a nice, nest egg by 50. And so, I think that, I was fortunate in my case that I didn't have a lot of other people outside of myself to look after. And so I was able to take a lot of risk and be very aggressive rebuilding back that portfolio. And now I've been kind of peeling that back as, I've kind of a little bit older. And so I think that's where it goes down to, not thinking about this as a binary decision, is that with those outcomes I talk about is you got to think about the capacity, because you may be in an unfortunate situation. I think of my mother as an example, right? She was, how old was she? Maybe late 40s, early 50s when she got divorced. Her settlement was dividing up debt.
Oh.
Yeah, so she had to start from scratch in the negative.
Oh.
She did retire, and she's been retired very happily. So it's not always a thing where there's a pot of something to divide up. Sometimes it's the opposite. And that's why I go back to, okay, figure out these outcomes you need to focus on. And, we had some conversations, as my brother and sister, and, helping mom out at home, and, she had to work the hours and those sorts of things. So, but one thing she was very good at is she always focused on outcome, right? She always said, you know what, despite the fact that she started with negative net worth, she still put away a certain amount of money every week. And people think, oh, it's impossible, I can't do it. But just think about that coffee. I won't say the coffee company name, just in case they think we're infringing on their copyright. But think of a popular coffee brand. You think about that. If you have one of those every day, do you really need to take that extra vacation at this time? Do you need to can you cook more meals at home? Things like that. And so
those many subscriptions we have that we subscribe to and we're paying, and we actually don't even look at our credit card statements to see that they're going through and seeing how much money is going out the door.
Yeah. And And I really like to go back to what I said originally earlier in this conversation is like taking the time to reflect and think and not feeling rushing yourself to make a decision. I did a full accounting of what was going on with myself. Like I realized I'm never going back to having the kind of house that we had at the time. And your point about subscriptions, I laugh about that because I think about all these things that just accumulated. We worry about accumulating stuff. Try accumulating subscriptions and things like that. And you realize, oh my gosh, like I was paying this much. I don't need that, right?
Mm-hmm. So you talk about about knowing what you want your end game to be like when you're trying to make a decision about conservative or aggressive. If I'm not financially savvy and my ex-partner was the financial driver in the relationship, how do I know what I need my outcome to be? How do I figure that out?
Yeah, that's a great question because I see it not just with divorcees, but with widows at times. And, as much as I think historically we may have thought, oh, well, it's, the wife who's, in the situation. I'm actually seeing more than I have in the past with men actually in this situation as well. And so, I think that a starting point is you need to get some kind of financial projections in place, right? And really what that's going to mean, there's some services online that do it. There's some of the online brokerages that offer some basic financial kind of planning type stuff, financial projections. But I think that one of the most important things that you could do for yourself is get a proper financial projection. Because what it does, it looks at everything you have today. It looks at the outcomes you're looking for. It looks at the cash flows and does all the discounts and all that stuff. And kind of comes up with like your game plan. Like, how much do you need to save? Have you saved enough? How much risk do you really need to take? I call it the Bill Gates effect for some people where they have so much money, they really don't need to take any risk. What's more important is to preserve maybe that wealth for the next generation, right? And I think also too, the other thing people need to remember when they're figuring out that strategy and the financial projection, don't approach it the same way. Like if you are working or you have a business and what have you, one of the things I often say to people is the way you made your money is not the same way you're going to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you kind of also remember that when you're doing these financial projections that are now you got your outcomes you're thinking about, and just remember nothing's ever locked in stone. You're not stuck down a certain path, but you're not going to build a house without at least some architectural plans, right? You can make changes as you go along, but you need something to start with. And I would highly recommend financial projections. And of course, full service advisors can offer that. What you want to be careful at is not to be sold on a bunch of other services when you're just trying to get the information of what you need to do to where you need to be. Unfortunately, sometimes that conversation with a professional can get clouded with, other services that might be of need for you, but they're not the important question you need to answer at the moment. The important one is you got your outcomes. Now, how are you going to achieve that?
What financial steps should someone take when initiating a divorce, especially like during the divorce? What steps should they take? The shared assets.
Okay. I think there's, again, different answers to this because it depends. Is it a collaborative divorce or is it acrimonious? Or is it even worse than that? I think that, again, divorces don't happen in a week or a day or what have you. I think that regardless if you're going to have a divorce or not, I think you should empower yourself to at least know what your assets are, where things sit, what are the investments, that both you have. And I think those are things that people should do regardless. Now, the reality is not everybody's interested in tracking their RSP or their TFSA. They let their spouse do it, which is fine. I think if you get to the point that this is going to come or you're just feeling uneasy, I think the best advice I heard from somebody else in your podcast was take some pictures, right? Don't worry about trying to get all the copies of the statements. Just take some pictures of different stuff, right? Financial assets, pictures of, things because it will help down the road when it comes to what kind of information you request and what have you. I think that, again, if you have a collaborative divorce, the law is pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm going to leave that one because that's what I think people kind of hope for. But if you got one that's a little bit more strenuous or acrimonious, I think you really need to remember that at the end of the day, you need to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And particularly if you have children, you got to think about their best interests. And it's tough because emotionally you can get pulled in all directions. And if you're in an abusive situation, I'm dealing with it right now with a few clients that, well, they kind of want to give them a second chance, or they want to, maybe we shouldn't go ahead with, certain things. And just remember, at the end of the day, you need to look after yourself, right? And I think that, again, collecting some information, but also to, like, the time leading up to it, be part of the what's going on with your finances, right? Don't have to make every decision, just you need to be involved. And again, if you don't want to do that, at least take some pictures. I think it's a good, starting.
Definitely having records and knowing what's there is important, because you may know in your mind what it was, but if you don't have a record of it, somebody's going to ask you about it down the road. And we want to be optimistic that you can reconcile in your relationship, but it's always better to be prepared.
And I would also suggest talking to a good therapist ahead of time on how to have the conversation. Because if you suddenly had no interest in the finances, no interest in the portfolio, and you come home from work and you talk to your spouse and say, "Hey, where's this? What's this? I want to," they're going to be like, "What's going on?" And if it could be acrimonious, then they're going to do things that they shouldn't do to hide assets and things like that. And so I think, I know it's not financial advice, but I would talk to a good therapist on how to have that conversation without, escalating or creating a conflict, or, somebody, getting their back up thinking that, well, why do you need to know all this information, right?
Yeah. You said an interesting word there, hiding assets.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard this many times with my clients. My ex-husband hid assets, and it's become ugly because they're not disclosing everything. Yeah. In this day and age with technology and everything like that, can we not see the paper trail of where those assets have gone?
Ultimately, yes. But unfortunately, listen, the little training I've had on that side when I was going to university, I was always taught, respect the courts. If the judge gives an order, respect it. If you don't, you're going to be in for a load of trouble, right? And I think that normal people operate normally. That's how things operate. I think, unfortunately, the courts, in my humble opinion, are failing at kind of dealing with people that see themselves above the law or above the divorce process and aren't willing to accept the fact that we do have laws in this province that specifically lay out how assets should be divided. And there's some wiggle room on each side, depending on the situation. What I've seen more is not so much that the information isn't there. It's reluctance of, unfortunately, the courts to use their powers to bring those people to heal. Because you're right, unless you're burying cash or gold in the backyard, which, believe it or not, I've seen that one too. It's really difficult to move forward, even if you're in the right, even if nobody's disagreed with you, unless the courts force it. And it just, unfortunately, again, I'm not the lawyer here, and I'm not a judge, and I don't pretend to be. I just, from an outsider observing, it's extremely frustrating to watch. And there's two cases right now of two clients of mine. They're fairly high profile that are dealing with exactly this. And, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate because this takes time and legal fees, and there's a stress of, how are you going to look after yourself or your children or your parents or whoever else that, is dependent upon you. And you're only hoping that, you get something sorted at the end of the day.
I think that also goes to speak that we should have a discussion around, no matter where you are in your relationship, you should always have your own bank account and always squirrel some money away. So, because we don't want to go into a relationship thinking that that relationship is going to end someday, but with a 55% divorce rate, there's a high probability it might. Yeah. However, I think just having some financial control of something and having something that you can access in emergency times, whether it be divorce or even death, where you're waiting for insurances to pay out or you find out things you didn't know.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that people don't realize, this isn't so much investment advice, but it's just general financial advice is, if they've kind of taken a sideline to their finances and what's been going on in the relationship, from a financial standpoint, they end up losing a spouse either by way of divorce or they pass away or they get critically injured. Like, I can't tell you how many women are shocked just trying to get credit, right? And they say, yeah, but my net worth is this. What do you mean I can't get a credit card? Well, I'm
or
sorry.
I had a joint credit card. Doesn't that count for something? But unfortunately, the joint credit card doesn't report on your credit bureau because they don't.
Thinking back to some of your previous questions on just like how do you kind of prepare for the divorce? Actually, that's one thinking about it. Like, absolutely, you want to have established credit. Like, going into particularly an acrimonious divorce without established credit, that is going to create another level of stress for you when it comes to you getting something simple as a mortgage, which I'm sure
I have the philosophy that established credit should exist even if you are not going into a divorce, because you never know when you're going to need it. Like, going back to the conversation, if somebody passes away, if your partner suddenly passes away and it's like they're in their 20s or they're in their 30s and you have no credit, even trying to get a credit card in your 30s can be challenging because they're like, well, where have you been for the last 10 years? What's been going on? How come you're just paying cash? What's happening?
And you go back to tracking financial transactions. Yes, it's easier, but now all of a sudden, now you look like you're suspicious because you're doing all these financial transactions, but you have no history. And so that's another problem that people run into is trying to explain their financial transactions when they're in the middle of it. I mean, listen, my own wife, I very much have encouraged her to establish her own credit, and she's done all those things. But when we first met, I mean, she didn't have any of that stuff, and that was my biggest concern: was if something happened to me, how would she be able to move forward with things, right?
Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce Circle podcast. Together, we're rewriting the story of divorce, from endings to empowered new beginnings. Join me next time for part 2 of my conversation with Seth Allen. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.